Hello and welcome back to the L15weekly podcast in a week where the Premier League saw multiple games being played. The Championship also returned. There's lots of action to come on L15weekly podcast. Make sure you stay tuned and we'll get straight into the action from over the past week.
The L15weekly podcast on YouTube, giving you the latest news, views and opinions from the football world. Join me every Friday from 5 p.m. for a brand new episode of the L15weekly podcast.
So obviously a lot of action to cover from many leagues across Europe. Obviously the Bundesliga is entering into its final weekend this season. Yeah, final weekend for the Bundesliga. Obviously a lot is wrapped up in terms of the Bundesliga, apart from who's going to be playing in that relegation qualification places and who's going to finish in the final Champions League spots. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Bundesliga gets on. Also, a quick disclaimer: if you can hear any traffic noises, I normally do have my windows shut when I'm doing this podcast, but unfortunately it's absolutely scorching where I am. If you're from England, if you didn't know, we're having a bit of a couple of days of heat waves at the moment. I think it's about 28 degrees or something like that, and I'm going to have to keep my window. 31 degrees it is at the moment, so obviously I'm going to have to keep my windows open just for now. I mean, that's not my preference. Obviously I like to keep my sound nice and crisp and things like that, but obviously I cannot have the windows closed during this, or else I may melt. But obviously lots of Premier League action, which we're going to cover first on the L15weekly podcast. So when we left you last week, we were previewing Norwich, Southampton and all those sorts of games that were coming up over the next week. I'm not going to review every single. Feel like that's going to drag on quite a while. There's obviously 2 rounds of fixtures there to go through, so that would be a little unfair on your ears. And obviously if you want, I like to keep my podcasts about half an hour or below. Sometimes they can be a bit less. Last week was 20 minutes, but this week I hope to keep that under half an hour limit, despite the amount of football that's been played. So we've got to have a look at some of the big games that were played over the past week in the Premier League. We'll start with Norwich versus Southampton, which was very good game, in all fairness. Southampton dominated Norwich. Norwich just couldn't handle them at the back. I don't know what happened there, but Norwich were really good coming out the blocks, keeping that ball. But Southampton, they just went straight ahead and ploughed through. They just cut through Norwich's defence like a knife. It was quite disgusting, actually. I mean, Southampton are always very, very prolific in front of goal. You've got Danny Ings, and he's a fantastic goal scorer. But Norwich just could not handle the power and pace of Southampton at the back. I mean, Nathan Redmond's really good creating chances. Danny Ings obviously finishing chances just for a bit of fun, really. Stuart Armstrong getting in on the act as well, and that propels Southampton towards that magic 40 points mark. But I think it's going to be a lot less than 40 points, really. This sort of magical points total that you're supposed to get to keep yourself out of the relegation zone. I mean, Norwich City are probably done down there at the bottom. That's a lot of points to make up. That is a lot of points in Premier League football, and you consider the fact that they've just gone out and got beaten by a mid-table side, which are Southampton at the moment, or lower mid-table side of Southampton. You just can't see Norwich getting out of this at the moment. I mean, you feel for them because you feel like Norwich play some really nice football. They play a really nice brand of keeping the ball and things like that, but at the moment they just haven't been good enough in the Premier League, and I feel like unfortunately they're going to have to go down to the Championship. Shortly after Norwich and Southampton, it was Manchester United and Tottenham, and they played out a pretty decent clash at the new Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. They played a good game, Spurs. I mean, Steven Bergwijn, I was watching this game on the TV. Steven Bergwijn scored after 27 minutes. David De Gea, I mean, it's a real mistake from him. I don't know what he was doing. Harry Maguire also doesn't deserve a lot of praise for his defending. He got caught 2 square on to Steven Bergwijn, and it was a powerful shot, give you that, but it was, De Gea got a massive hand onto that, and he was not able to keep that out. But then later on in the game, Eric Dyer brought down Paul Pogba, and that was a penalty dispatched by Bruno Fernandes, who's come into the Premier League and has shown Man United fans exactly the sort of player that they were missing. We'll talk about the game that Man United played in midweek, but Paul Pogba played, and him and Fernandes look like they've got a nice partnership going on, and Anthony Martial in there as well. And as I said when Bish came on the podcast a couple of weeks ago, I can see Manchester United getting right into that top four, and I can also see Wolves following them at the moment. Leicester don't look great at the moment since the restart, but we'll have to see how that pans out. The next day, Arsenal, after having an atrocious performance at Manchester City, I suppose it wasn't too great against Manchester City. I bet you can blame David Luiz, but no David Luiz obviously for the game against Brighton, and he was suspended. But yet Arsenal still couldn't muster a victory, let alone a point. They couldn't even get a point out of Brighton. Dominating the ball, just couldn't create the chances. There were a few changes from the game. I think there was a mistake by Mikel Arteta, taking out Eddie Nketiah and putting in Alexander Lacazette. Eddie Nketiah could start for Arsenal and be a main player if Mikel Arteta moulds him into that player and lets him sort of flourish and have a bit of freedom up front. But it's not been great, if I'm being completely honest, from Arsenal. A bit sloppy in possession sometimes. They keep the ball sometimes really nicely, but sometimes they just struggle to be composed. This has got to be one of the worst Arsenal sides for years now. It's not looking good. They've got some really good players. They've got Hector Bellerin, probably what could be one of the best fullbacks in the league. Hasn't quite been the same since returning from injury. They've got Guendouzi, who could be one of the better midfielders in the league. Nicola Pepe, £72 million on him. Yes, he scored, but how much has he been putting in shifts for Arsenal since joining? 7 goals in 33 games. It's not really a flourishing record, is it? He's been okay. I think he's probably been one of the better players for Arsenal, but £72 million, you'd expect a bit better than that. Aubameyang, he clearly wants a move, so I think he's on his way out of Arsenal. I think he's waiting for that last payday. He scored loads of goals for Dortmund, still scores goals for Arsenal, but now a move seems to be on the horizon. With him looking to be moving out of the club at the end of the season. It doesn't make sense to me. It's just not been a great season for Arsenal at all. They've got a really good goalkeeper in Bernd Leno, who was taken off. This Brighton side, they're a good footballing side, but they're not one of the best teams in the league. They're not an amazing side. Arsenal could have put them to the sword quite easily. I don't know what's quite going wrong there. Is it too big of a step up for Mikel Arteta from being an assistant manager at Man City? Only time will tell, but I think at the moment Arsenal looking like a bit of a car crash. Another game that was played on Saturday the 20th, which was about a week ago now. Wolves battered past West Ham United. They showed West Ham how to play. West Ham is starting to look a bit worried for West Ham at the moment because they're just teetering above the drop zone. And if they carry on with this form, they lost again to Tottenham, which we're going to talk about a bit more in a few minutes. But West Ham, it's very frustrating watching them because they've obviously got some real ambition in the transfer market. They've obviously got a bit of money to spend, and they've obviously got some, money to splash out on players. You've spent how much was what's his name? Sebastian Haller. He was nearly £40 million. Albion Ajeti, £7 million. Thomas Souček, nice signing. £4 million, a nice little sort of shrewd move. Jared Bowen, nearly £20 million. Have they turned up? Have they turned up? Felipe Anderson had a good little spell when Pellegrini was in charge, but now seems to just sort of doss around the pitch like he doesn't really care about it. He was quite good last season, give him that. But where's the consistency in some of these West Ham players? You've got some really nice players. Declan Rice will be gone if you go down. You're probably losing one of your best prodigies. I've never been a huge cut for Declan Rice for England. I don't think he really fits in there, but he's one of the best prodigies. And at the moment, if West Ham go down, they could lose one of the best prodigies they've had in quite absolutely gone, and that would be a shame, because he could be the next Mark Noble. I mean, he could be Mr. West Ham, and Mark Noble being relied on to make so many chances is a bit silly. Pablo Fornals as well, coming in from Villarreal for another 20 or 30 million pounds, not really turned up this season at all. I think there's far too many playing for the money in this West Ham side, and I feel like there's problems on and off the pitch which are affecting the players. But if you look at the positive side of this game between West Ham and Wolves did show some real bottle, and they look like they're fired up for those Champions League spots. I mean, they're joint level on points with Wolves, with Manchester United. Sorry, they could go above Chelsea if Chelsea lose tonight. I think it is that Chelsea are playing, or tomorrow night. I can't remember. I think it's tonight. It's Wolves that seem to be pushing, and whilst Sheffield United are falling down the drain at the moment. Sheffield United also being beaten by 3-0 by Newcastle, 3-0 by Manchester United. Very uncharacteristic of them. Another game which caught my eye came on Sunday, which we just briefly mentioned then, believe it or not, but Newcastle Sheffield United, what a game. Newcastle absolutely putting Sheffield to the sword there. The goals from St Maximin, Matt Ritchie, even, oh come on Sheffield, even Joel Linton scored against you. That's a bit pathetic, Sheffield guys, I'm afraid. John Egan got sent off for hauling down Joel Linton when he was one-on-one with the goalkeeper. So could have had two, but not likely to have finished that one off. But he did manage to get a goal, which breaks a bit of a duck for him, doesn't it? As he doesn't score too often, Joel Linton. He's only scored 2 goals. Well, let's have a look at when his last one was. That was in the FA Cup. His last Premier League goal for Joel Linton came on the third day of the season. Is that against Tottenham? Oh dear. Joel Linton. But Sheffield United not looking the part for a Champions League side. I mean, they're 8th now. They're out the Europa League spaces as well. So you start to worry a little bit about them. Chelsea also put away Villa in the next game on last Sunday, after Courtney Hawes just tapped in a goal after 43 minutes, but Pulisic and Giroud scored 2 goals in very, very quick succession to seal the deal for Chelsea. Chelsea looking pretty strong in terms of Champions League spaces, but they've got to keep their eye on the teams behind them, because Wolves and Manchester United, usually I'd expect the Merseyside derby to be a little bit more entertaining than this, but we'll just quickly rush through it. It was a 0-0 game between Everton and Liverpool. Liverpool having 70, Everton having 30%. Everton not really having many chances, but came out man of the match with lots of good saves. Liverpool didn't seem on it in that game, but they certainly did come back, which we're going to talk about later in this episode. In other news, Manchester City also wiped the floor with Burnley with a 5-0 victory, in which I think the game was marred by a disgraceful banner going over the stadium saying, I can't remember exactly what it said, I think it was White Lives Matter, which is disgraceful, obviously. That's not on. I do hope whoever did decide to fly that banner over the stadium gets banned from football, because that is just not acceptable. It's not on. Obviously that has no place in the game whatsoever. We'll move on now to the Tuesday's fixtures. Leicester couldn't beat Brighton in a 0-0 draw, fairly boring game, but Tottenham put 2 past West Ham. Tottenham looking a bit more compact at the back. I think that's really good to see. Jose has said that he has had more time to train the first team, so obviously it's been helpful with his defence, because obviously Jose, when he's come into clubs before, he's usually had a lot of time to prepare and a lot of time to organise that back four, and that's probably why his defence is so solid and so as good as it has been at other clubs. But they managed to get a 2-0 win with Thomas Souček scoring an own goal. But again, Jared Bowen, I have to say, I did criticise him earlier for some of his performances, but he was actually quite good in this game. He showed a lot of flair and creativity, and was at least trying to make things happen for his team. Although a lot of the other team didn't decide to play along with that, and didn't decide to help him in his troubles. The next game, the next day, which was last night actually, which I was tuned in for, which was Manchester United 3, Sheffield United 0. Anthony Martial, what can you say about this guy? 3 goals, scored all 3 goals in the game. It was an incredible performance from Manchester United as a whole. They really put Sheffield United to the sword. Oh, Sheffield, you feel sorry. You feel like this fairy tale's sort of coming to an end now, because this period of stoppaging in the Premier League has sort of ruined their momentum. And you feel bad for them, because that was not the back four they'd have liked to play against Manchester United. Not the sort of usual organisation that they normally have at the back. No Egan, also obviously no O'Connell, just Chris Basham. They did miss those two. They had Phil Jagielka and Jack Robinson. Jack Robinson, give him credit, has come in and done a really good job in that game against Villa. I feel like he's probably at stat, but Phil Jagielka, he's a bit past it, isn't he? Unfortunately, 37 years of age, probably past it now. But the midfield and strikers were as normal. It's just Manchester United just picked them apart. A great performance from Paul Pogba again, starting to find his feet. David De Gea, a bit better this time. Obviously not to blame for any goals, because none of them passed him. So Manchester United, you can't see them shying away from these Champions League spots this year. Newcastle Aston Villa wasn't really a game that produced many thrills. It was a 1-1 draw. Dwight Gale, always a baggy, isn't he? He's always a baggy scoring against the Villa. But Omar Hamady also equalised later on in that game. Liverpool also went out and crashed Crystal Palace's party. Crystal Palace obviously having quite a good game against Bournemouth. Bournemouth now in a bit of trouble as well. I mean, we haven't mentioned them this episode. Bournemouth in a little bit of trouble now. But Liverpool battering Crystal Palace 4-0. The classic Liverpool performance. And Fabinho scoring a rocket, which didn't really get the attention it deserved, in front of no crowd. But Fabinho did a really good job in that game, and so did Liverpool. And they are now ever closer, within touching distance of getting that Premier League title. I think it's if Manchester City, lose to Chelsea tonight, it's Liverpool's title for the taking. But that's enough Premier League for now. But my favourite league came back over last weekend, and that was the Championship, which was incredible to have back. Obviously, I love the Championship. It's such an unpredictable league. It's one of those leagues where form is quite important, but the table places are not one that matters. And there were plenty of games that caught my eye over the past week. The first one being the huge midday clash on the Saturday, which was between Fulham and Brentford, one that I watched very eagerly, and one that came out with a bit of a shock result, I must say. Fulham failing to break down the solid Brentford centre-back pairing of Pontus Jansson and Ethan Pinnock. But they were just so good, Brentford, towards the end of that game. They had that extra energy that Fulham didn't have towards the end of the game, where they were just able to carve through. They absolutely carved through them like a knife. Emiliano Marcondes came on and got a goal and assist, was it? Yeah, goal and assist for Said Benrahma as well. So it was a great game in the end from Brentford. It was an absolute smash and grab victory from Brentford. They held on. Fulham weren't really creating too much, but Brentford have had chances. But towards the end of the game, they just turned on the style, and Brentford are now still in fourth, but they are within touching distance of making it third place. And obviously the top two we're going to come on to talk about in a minute. A big game towards the bottom of the table came between Charlton Athletic and Hull City. This game resulted in Charlton winning 1-0 thanks to a goal from Jason Pearce for Charlton. Obviously, with lots of issues off the pitch with Charlton, you start getting a bit worried about whether they're going to stay up in the league. I like Charlton. I like them as a team. I think they deserve to stay up. But obviously, Lyle Taylor being a word that I cannot express on this podcast because I like to keep things PG here, but Lyle Taylor playing up off field, saying he's not going to play because he wants to move. I mean, what's the point in doing that? I don't understand why you'd make yourself so hated amongst fans just to make sure you get a move. It's a bit disgraceful if you ask me. He's done a really good job for Charlton this season with 11 goals, putting in a real good shift for them. Just confuses me how he's so willing to turn the fans against him, the fans that have supported him throughout this 2-year career at Charlton, nearly 3 years now. Nearly 2 years now for Charlton. A man that peaked really late in his career, how he's willing to turn the fans against him just for the sake of a bit of money. I don't think he's that good, if I'm being completely honest. He's done an excellent job for Charlton, and if I was him, I'd be careful what he wishes for, because he could just end up at a similar Championship club that are fighting near the bottom. Hull City weren't great in this game either. and are now inside the relegation zone. So Charlton have leapfrogged them. Another team that are just teetering above the bottom is Middlesbrough, who have let their manager Jonathan Woodgate go after this game, which ended up in a 3-0 loss to Swansea City. Swansea hovering around the playoffs now, aren't they? Starting to give themselves a bit of a chance. And Middlesbrough sacking Jonathan Woodgate after nearly not even a season in charge, with Neil Warnock, Championship expert, coming in to help guide Middlesbrough away from the bottom. I think that's a very good appointment. You know, you give him a bit of time and he might be able to build you towards a Premier League promotion. I think that'd be nice for Middlesbrough. Obviously they went up a few seasons ago, but it wasn't to be. I think Woodgate did need some more support, but Warnock is definitely the right appointment here. The next game we're going to talk about is my team, West Bromwich Albion, played Birmingham City, where we drew 0-0 with them. I can probably give you a bit more of an insight into this game as I was watching. But in my opinion, Birmingham City came, they set out their stall, they wanted a 0-0 draw, they wanted a draw, maybe even nick a winner, but they just came for that point. If if they only got a point, that would be alright. You got that sort of feeling that would be okay with them. But West Brom, we didn't move the ball quick enough. The ball was not moved quick enough. That we weren't as penetrating as we'd like to be. I feel Matt Phillips, Carnu, Robinson, poor games from them. The game would change when Grady Diangana came on after 60 minutes. I think things were just as bad at that point. He didn't look like he was sort of match ready. He looked match fit. He's definitely match fit because he's been training for weeks on end. But it just didn't look like he was ready to play football. Obviously, we had all the best chances, we had all the possession, we just couldn't find that crucial goal, and that upsets me a bit because there was a big chance there after Fulham had lost to Brentford to take it 9 points clear. And if we'd have known what would happen the next day, which we're going to talk about now, with Cardiff and Leeds United, where Cardiff beat Leeds United 2-0 in a game where Cardiff absolutely did the job on Leeds. Cardiff hardly having chances on goal. Those two were just stunners, really. Glatzel and Hoylett scoring, Leeds having all the ball. If we'd have known what was happening the next day, I'm sure that West Brom would have played a bit better than that. Leeds as well, you'd think that because of the way they've played last season and the fact that they leaked off about this time in the season, they sort of dropped off. They looked a bit tired, a bit wary. So it was a shame to see that. It's not a shame for a West Brom fan to see them dropping off like this, but it was weird to see the fact that they had that break, something that we thought that they needed to make sure that they didn't tire out. A bit of fitness, bit of relaxation, that sort of break. We thought that'd be all that Leeds needed to take them into the next game, but unfortunately not. And Leeds have lost to Cardiff, and now they're second in the table. Some big clashes in the Championship coming up this weekend. West Brom, Brentford coming up tonight. If you're watching this now. I feel like Brentford are going to come at us really strong. They're in a nice bit of form. They can smell blood, really, with beating Fulham and Leeds losing and us drawing. But Leeds and Fulham have both lost. But Brentford, they'll be smelling blood and they'll be seeing if they can get up into the top of the table. Also, Leeds and Fulham are playing as well, which is another big game. It's sort of battle of those teams that haven't really been performing. So it'll be interesting to see if they can cause problems. In terms of this podcast, that is it from me. It's been a pleasure having you join us for this. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Hopefully you've got some opinions that you'd like to share in the comment section below about some of the things I've talked about. Do you think West Ham are going to go down? Do you think that they've put the money into the right players here? Do you think Manchester United will make Champions League football? There's lots of questions for you guys to answer in the comment section below. Make sure you drop a like on the video if you've enjoyed. Make sure you see you next time. Goodbye.
The L15 weekly podcast on YouTube, giving you the latest news, views, and opinions from the football world.